Fine. So we're in the middle of, or at the very beginning rather, of this chapter of repentance by Rabbi Steinsaltz. He explained a few revolutionary ideas. Number one, the idea that repentance is really a bad translation for this notion that we are trying to study. It's the word that most people use, and therefore he uses it too. But the way Judaism relates to repentance is really with the word Teshuvah. And Teshuvah does not mean repentance, it means to return. That is because when a person sins really or does something wrong, he doesn't need repentance, he needs to return, because that sin is just a deviation from his true path or from his very core. And by doing Teshuvah, what we are doing is that we're returning to that core, returning to that path and aligning ourselves with Hashem. That's idea number one. Idea number two, speaking of that core, he also said that Judaism is really not a religion, but it's an identity. He gave the example of the field of plants. That's the last example that he gave, that many different things can influence a plant, but at the very core, the plant remains true to itself. So to here, a Jew can undergo many different circumstances and many different trials and challenges, but the core remains the core. And that is the core that we have to relate to when we do Teshuvah. That's the core that we have to not just align ourselves with, but in a way that we have to allow it to become a GPS, so to speak, and to guide us in life. Those are the general ideas that he shared thus far. But let's continue on to delve Rabbi Steinsaltz's 95th year, at least in this book, middle of the page. Anyone want to read? Reattachment to one's prototype. Anyone?
Okay, I'll read, Rabbi. Okay. Reattachment to one's prototype may be expressed in many ways, not only in accepting a faith or a credo or in fulfilling certain traditional obligations. As he liberates himself from alien influences, the penitent can only gradually straighten himself out. He has to overcome the forms engraved by time and place before he can reach his own image. He must break free of the chains, the limitations, and the restrictions imposed by environment and education. If pursued aimlessly with no clear goal, this primal search does not transcend the urge to be free. Without a vector, it can be spiritually exhausting and may never lead to a genuine discovery of the true self. In this respect,
let's pause here for a second, if you don't mind, Gila, because all these words are so loaded with meaning and wisdom. So, what Rabbi Steinsaltz will do now from this point on, if we have to return to the true self, we first have to define what that self is. And that's what he tries to define that self. What is that self? So first he says, well, we very often define ourselves by the education, by the environment we're in. Certainly the education that we have and and the environment that we're in has influences on that self, but it's not the self itself. And in a way, in order to return to that true self, we have to free us from all those influences. You know, I'm reminded, really, maybe to amplify this idea, I'm reminded of one of the most famous commandments of God to a human being in the Torah, and that is the commandment of God to Abraham. At the beginning of Abraham, of the Torah, when Abraham was 70 years old, or 75 years, God says to Abraham, Lech lecha. Remember that commandment? Lech lecha me'artzecha mi'moladetecha u'mibeit avicha. Go for yourself and to the place that I will show you. Now, what God really tells Abraham is not just to go, but you should leave. Lech lecha, leave what? Me'artzecha, from your land, mi'moladetecha, from your place of birth, u'mibeit avicha, from the house of your father. Why does God have to use those three terms? Why not just tell Abraham, leave to the place that I will show you? What does it mean to leave from your land, to leave from your birthplace, and to leave from the house of your father? What it really refers to is those three influences that we all share in life. The three main influences to every human being on this planet are those three things. The land that we live in, me'artzecha, the environment of the land, the culture of the land certainly influences us, to the point that Maimonides says that it's impossible for man to remain uninfluenced by his environment. And the only way one can maybe shake off that influence is that he becomes the influencer, not the influencee. That's the wisdom of Maimonides on this idea. But there's certainly many influences that we receive from Artsecha, from our land. There's also influences that we receive from our birthplace, which really is referring to from our genes, from our genetics, our DNA, the way we're wired biologically. That has influences on us. And then the third is mi beit avicha, from the house of your father, which means from your education, from the way your parents raised you. That also has influences on you. And what God is saying to Abraham, if you really wish, almost what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying here, if you really wish to discover your full self and to live a life that's true to your full self and to actualize your full self, then lech lecha me'artzecha mimoladecha mibeit avicha. Then you have to leave those three major sources of influence: your land, your culture, so to speak, your genetics, and your education. And this is what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying here. The restrictions imposed by environment and education, those are restrictions to the self. Now, therefore, Rabbi Steinsaltz would very often say that the goal of man is not so much to learn. That's maybe one goal. But the main goal is to unlearn, to, in a way, peel yourself at one point and say, okay, I accumulated all this knowledge, but now where am I in all of this? Let's unlearn everything that may affected or even encaged my true self. And this is, by the way, speak Steinsaltz, and I know many of you have been connected to him directly or indirectly, and I'm sure many of you have read the volumes upon volumes of eulogies and writings that have been written about him this past week. In every channel possible. It's quite amazing the impact he's had on our world altogether. Jewish and non-Jewish, academic and non-academic, different cultures, different demographics, different ages. It's really astounding to me. I mean, it's unfortunate, as I mentioned in my previous class, that human nature is such that we only truly appreciate a person once he's passed. It's really, really sad that that's the way God created us. And maybe it should propel us to appreciate the people that we have living around us, maybe even more so now. We don't have to wait until they die to truly learn them and appreciate them. But the world is appreciating Rabbi Steinsaltz much more this past week. I mean, from the president of Israel to the prime minister of Israel to the Pope himself, to New York Times, to Ma'ariv and Yediot Achronot, to all sorts of magazines and all sorts of people, all sorts of cultures. The prime minister of Italy came out with this statement. It's amazing. But everyone is eulogizing this giant of a man. But what's quite amazing about Rabbi Steinsaltz is that he never really cared about what people say about him, think about him, whether he's a once-in-a-millennium scholar or not. I really wonder what Rabbi Steinsaltz would think about all these eulogies that are written about him. I can tell you that he was one of the most humble people, if not the most humble people, the most humble person I've ever met. And the reason I think for that is because he understood those words that we are learning right now. And that is that once we become receptive to all these accolades, then they become labels and they become restrictive to the real self, because the real self really is so unrestricted. It's so unlimited. It's so unboxed. And it's so free from any type of influence, educational, environmental, or cultural. And Rabbi Steinsaltz knew that. Rabbi Steinsaltz lived that. He was a man who, when you met him, you met his true self unleashed, completely revealed, completely exposed. Now I know it takes a lot of courage to be exposed like Rabbi Steinsaltz was, and to allow that self really to guide you and to be fully expressed each and every time. I mean, it takes a lot of courage because you become vulnerable by doing so, and for other reasons too. But that's really the goal here of man, to follow his inner calling and completely adhere to that true self, to the point that whatever people can say about me, that's not important. That's just to relate these words uttered and written by Rabbi Steinsaltz to Rabbi Steinsaltz himself, now that the world has come to appreciate who this giant of man was. You know, I think I mentioned to you, but not only was Rabbi Steinsaltz also running away from any type of honor, but his son told me confidentially, but I can mention this since this is a Steinsaltz class, not just any type of class, but the tombstone will be revealed. They do it pretty quickly in Israel on Friday morning. And Rabbi Steinsaltz left a will. He left a will because many years ago, he was very sick and he needed surgery, and the doctors told him, look, there's no promise that you'll come out alive out of this surgery. This was in 1981. He had a 26-hour surgery. It took out a tumor from his stomach that was 22 pounds. Imagine. And just before that, he had months to prepare himself. So he wrote a will, not like, you know, what's typical will, but maybe a more specific will of what to do when he dies and what happens to his legacy and so on. And in his will, he wrote that he doesn't want any eulogies at his funeral at all. And that's why if you follow the funeral online, and it's still on YouTube, you'll see that the only thing that was uttered at his funeral was nigunim, was songs. His students were there around and singing and singing. It was one of the most moving sights I've ever seen. But in addition to that, his tombstone that will be revealed on Friday, you might be astounded by what it won't have the rabbi on it. Why? He didn't want it. No accolades at all. That was the man. He was a man on a mission, and that's what defined him. Himself and the mission of himself. It was God himself. He was a servant of God, and that's how he lived, and that's how he died. And in a way that, you know, bringing that now to the forefront of our consciousness, I think illustrates very well his own word, that we might have all sorts of influences, but they did not impede and obstruct that divine self that we are on a divine mission. Divine self that is on a divine mission needs to be divine regardless of what people say, not say about you. That's what this says. I'd love to open this up. I don't want to be the only one speaking. As I've often mentioned, this should be much more of a dialogue. That's how we learn. So anyone have anything to say? Anything? Comments, disagreements, questions?
In reading We Jews, it says the same thing, because he does talk about the fact that as Jews, we are like chameleons. We will become in the culture of where we are. And that's why we're so segmented.
Right.
And this basically puts us right back to saying we're all the same, and we really are the same, whatever it is that Jews are.
Right.
And it just follows exactly what it says here, except
right.
there's a whole book about it.
Right. Rabbi Steinsaltz's book also you're referring to, We Jews. I don't mean to put you on the spot, and maybe this is out of context, but you have to tell us how you're feeling, Vicky. Vicky had surgery not long ago. You good? Strong. I hope well. We'll touch base afterwards.
Don't want to talk about it. I have to go through more.
We'll touch
There's
base
more.
afterwards.
They didn't get everything, so going back under.
No problem. Okay. Sharona.
Well, I love the Lech Lecha explanation and the three elements, but I've been thinking a lot as Elul is coming up about what idols I have in my life. So I was looking at what you were saying in terms of idols of my identity, or you know, what I'm doing in the world, or how I look, or my finances, things like that, and how I, you know, I can't really move to another place unless I return to basically who I am and put those identities aside.
Right, right.
And I appreciated that.
Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And in a way, I think, you know, it's a lifetime work, because we're influenced every day by something else. And there's idols like you know, to use the word that you are using, all around, all the time. And it's that adherence, right, to the self and to the mission of the self that really is very hard, but also very crucial in this process. So, and I think, by the way, you know, Abraham, to go back to Abraham, he was told, Lech lecha ma'artzecha u'mimoladecha u'mibeit avicha. But that wasn't the only time he was told to do that. After, when he eventually reached that destination, it's not that, oh, God told him, now you arrived, you're free of these influences. No, what did God do then? He gave him another 9 tests. This was the first test. But then he gave him another 9 impossible tests. Each time challenging him again to unclothe himself, so to speak, to ensure that his self remains naked and exposed. That's so it's never ending. So it's not like, okay, he left Haran and now he's in Israel, he's in Canaan, and he can rest on his laurels. Just like Abraham too can never truly rest from that constant effort and adherence to the self. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else?
One of the quotes from Rabbi Steinsaltz, when one person takes one step ahead, something good happens to our world. But when 1 million people take one step ahead, the whole world shakes.
Right.
And
That's
especially now, I think that that's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Which is probably why he didn't want to be eulogized. He just wanted us all to be
Right.
that light and start shaking up the world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that, you know, the reason, going back to Rabbi Steinsaltz, and I know we're speaking about him a lot, but this is what this class is about. I think I was asking myself, because like we said, he impacted so many people. But what's amazing is that he could be a genius of the highest order, like the Newsweek magazine called him, or once in a millennium scholar, like the Time magazine called him. And he was indeed a walking encyclopedia, and it's like very few existed in history that achieved so much. But he could also relate to the smallest of children. He could relate to the most simple person. He was as accessible as it gets. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had this week of people who've told me that they bumped into him in the street and he told them something that changed their life. Or in shul, on Shabbat morning, at synagogue, and Tzemach Tzedek would come to him. I mean, some of us have had that privilege, and we had a community trip a few years ago. We went to his synagogue and we heard from him there also. But he was as accessible as it gets. And now I was asking myself, why is that? Like, why did he make himself so accessible? I mean, he had a schedule to follow. I mean, to translate the entire Talmud alone, the complete adherence to that schedule, to that timetable. I mean, he didn't know anything about time management. How do you allow himself to be pulled by all sorts of directions and give attention to anyone and everyone who just wanted? Someone told me that this week, yesterday, someone told me that he was a student in his yeshiva in Israel, and Rabbi Steinsaltz told him, look, this student had many issues, and Rabbi Steinsaltz told him, look, you have open access to my door whenever you want, and come and see me whenever you want. And he would go and see him at 3 o'clock in the morning, 3:30 in the morning. He would go and see him and sit with Rabbi Steinsaltz, and Rabbi Steinsaltz was immersed in his work, but he would always give him time. Now, you can say, you know, people that have a mission and that have goals to meet, usually they zoom in and nothing around them counts. So how did Rabbi Steinsaltz manage really to give so much attention to so many and to change so many people just by being so accessible? And I think we return to the same point. For Rabbi Steinsaltz, yes, he had his own goals. Yes, he had his own achievements and his own accomplishments to realize. But he understood that everything was what we call in the Kabbalistic language, hashgacha pratit, divine providence. If there's a young child in front of me right now, it's divine providence. What's the divine providence? Divine providence is that I need to speak to that young child. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been placed by God in front of me. If there's a scientist in front of me right now, I need to be able to converse with him and somehow affect him. and change his life to the best of my ability, give it my all. I have a goal to meet. I have this work that's waiting for me in my office. Doesn't matter. Everything is Ashgacha Pratit. Everything is providence. God, every person alongside your way. He plants every challenge alongside your way. And it's for you to come and respond to those challenges and the people and everything God gives you. Everything is divine providence. Now, that idea of a divine providence is again rooted in the idea that we are not here for ourselves. We're here to be souls, to be reflections of God. And if we are here just for ourselves, then what we do is that we dim God's light in our lives. When we are here for God, then we brighten God's light in our lives. And that light illuminates who Rabbi Steinsaltz was in a Kabbalistic way, so to speak, in a deeper way. But again, relating to this, to these words, to the self. Okay, anything else? Otherwise, we can continue a little more here with this paragraph. No. Okay. So who wants to continue? In this respect, not in vain has the Torah. Does anyone want to read? You're so quiet today.
Okay, I'll continue, I guess.
Please, Gila, yes.
Okay. In this respect, not in vain has the Torah been perceived as a system of knowledge and insights that guide the individual Jew to reach his own pattern of selfhood. The mutual relationship between the individual Jew and Judaism, between the man and his God, depends on the fact that Judaism is not only the law, the prescribed religious practice, but is a life framework that embraces his entire existence. Furthermore, it is ultimately the only framework in which, in his aloneness and in his search, he will be able to find himself. Whereas potentially a man can adapt himself, there exists, whether he acknowledges it or not, a path that is his own, which relates to him, to his family, and to his home.
Right. So I would use the example of, I mean, we can use thousands of examples, but I would use the example of an instrument. I know some of you are musicians. So let's say you play the piano. Let's say you play the violin. And you play the piano, but only with, instead of, I think there's eight octaves in a piano. I have a piano right here. I'm trying to count, but I think that's what there is. Who's a pianist here? So let's say you have a piano with only 2 octaves. Or let's say you play the violin and the violin has 4 strings. Let's say you have a violin with just 3 strings. How will that instrument sound? How will you even play that instrument? It's almost impossible unless you're Yitzchak Perman, but it's still almost impossible. Now, same here, what Judaism is not a matter of religion. If you're Jewish, and here is the connection between Judaism and the self that he spoke about at the beginning of this paragraph. Judaism is not a matter of religion. It's not something that you acquire outside of you. It's not something that you say, oh, this is a doctrine that I want to devote myself to. No, Judaism is a part of the self itself. It's part of your identity. It's one of those strings in that violin. It's one of those octaves in that piano. And taking that element away from you, if you're Jewish, is taking away from your instrument. So what Rabbi Steinsaltz here is saying is that Judaism depends on the fact that Judaism is not just a law, but it's a life framework that embraces the entire existence. What he's saying right here is that, again, it's part of your existence. It's part of who you are. To denounce it will be denouncing a part of you. By the way, it's true not just for Jews. I think it's true for other religions too. I think that, you know, when a Buddhist is Buddhist, he's playing his instrument in the full sense. And when a Jew is acting Jewishly, then he's playing his full instrument also in the full sense. He's making sure that those strings are also being played, not just the other strings that are part of himself. So that's really where Judaism comes into play, and that's how Judaism connects to that deeper self that we spoke about. It's a part of you, part of your very own identity. speaking of which, I mean, you know, again, Vicky before quoted "we Jews," but I think that's where this idea comes originally from. Many others have quoted this idea, I think, but Rabbi Steinsaltz is the one who really thought about it and revolutionized the world with it. But I think in the book "We Jews," it says that very clearly that Judaism is not a religion, right? It's not a race, because you have Jews from different racial backgrounds. It's not a geographical question, because you have Jews from all around the world. It's not a nationality, in other words, right? Because you don't have to be born in Israel, for example, to be Jewish. So he asked the question, what is Jewish? And his answer is, being Jewish is being part of a family. Now, what is a family then? If we want to go further, what is a family? A family is something that's inherent, something that's a part of us. I can't choose whether I want to be the son of these parents or the son of those parents. It's just a part of my existence. I can embrace it or reject it, but by rejecting, I'll be rejecting a part of my existence itself. And that is to connect this idea again with another idea, which is the same, by Rabbi Steinsaltz from a different book, "We Jews." You're very silent today, so need more dialogue.
I saw a little video that said, "What is a Jew?" and it started off, which is not a nationality, it's not this, it's not that, it's not by blood, because you can convert. He said basically we're a family, a very dysfunctional family, but we are a family.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Dysfunction. We would say that often. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Barry, you usually speak.
So I'm deep in thought, and I don't want to go down into a dark place. But
no, there's no dark place when it comes to 13 Petalled Rose.
What we're talking about right now is, it's kind of like a dysfunctional family. It's kind of like you never, particularly as a convert, you never feel like you're part of that family. And when times are tough and you're really physically dislocated, it's hard to keep that up. To feel that you're connected, even though I can't imagine anything else I would be doing or connected to. But and then when stress gets on top of all of that, it's complicated.
Yeah, and I think first Rabbi Steinsaltz, I think, relates to that in "We Jews." I haven't read it in a long time, but Vicky would refresh my memory. I know you just read it, but I think he does say, well, then what are converts if we're a family? What are converts? And he says that, well, they're just like adopted children in the family, and they're part of the family. So that, I think that's what he says, or something like that. But to go further, I think that, like any good family, good dysfunctional family, we all question our relationship with our family members. I'm sure it's happened to each and every one of you. It's happened to me too. Am I really proud of this family that I belong to? Do I really feel connected to them? I mean, where's my sense of belonging here? And that's normal. I think every family member feels that when you're in a family, especially when you're in a Jewish family, as dysfunctional as it may be. But it's part of the sentiments that come along with being a family member. So I don't think the sentiments are that you're referring to, Barry, are any strange to the phenomenon of being a family member. But they're amplified when stress comes about, and they're amplified when different situations come about. I say this though, that not to philosophize on this too much, but the question is really, what does it mean to have this sense of belonging? What does it mean to be a part of a family? What's interesting, you know, I want to go to the Kabbalistic term right here, but the word for family in Hebrew is an interesting word. By the way, it's used in different terms, but the word is mishpacha, right? That's a word for family. Now, what's interesting is this, the Arizal, I think, is the one who points this out, Rabbi Yitzchak Lura, who says that mishpacha has the word, a very, very questionable word within it. What's the word, the Hebrew word within mishpacha? Shifcha. Shifcha in Hebrew means maidservant. That's what I mean. Now, why would the word maidservant be in the word family? Well, what's the connection? There has to be a connection. I mean, nothing in the Hebrew language is by coincidence. Nothing in life is by coincidence, but certainly not in the Hebrew language. So why the word maidservant in the word family? And the answer given basically by Rabbi Yitzchak Luria is that just like a maidservant, you really have no choice. You have to work. You're part of it. Sometimes it feels like a maidservant. But even if it feels like a maidservant, you're stuck with it. Nothing you can do about it. Sometimes that's how families feel. You're a shifcha. You're like a maidservant. But it's part of being being a member of a family.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Oh, it's Linda.
It's Linda.
Hi.
Yes, I see you now. Yeah.
I was thinking when you were talking, I've studied Buddhism. I've studied science of mind. I've been around some of those other beliefs and studies, but I never felt like I fit because I'm Jewish. And no matter how I traveled in those groups, I was Jewish. And so they never, ever felt like home, even though I shared many of their thought ideas and peace and they have good morals and good background. But I was always Jewish. And so I had to come back to the Jewish part of me because even though I understood and liked what they said, I was not them. I was Jewish. So when you say family, to me, that's what that means is I'm Jewish. And so I belong to this large dysfunctional family of Judaism, but that's where I belong.
Right. It's very true on the same basis, speaking of Rabbi Steinsaltz, I don't know why this thought came to mind as you were speaking, but I remember, being with him in many different parts of America. Every time he would come, I would try and go visit him. And we went some beautiful parts of America. Not just New York, where, the industrial part of America comes alive, but San Diego, we went to the San Diego Zoo together and many places like that. But what's amazing is that during each and every trip, he would almost count the days to go back to Jerusalem. Rabbi Steinsaltz, where he was born and was raised and lived for his entire life. And I once asked him, so what's burning so much? Like, why? He says, because all these places might be beautiful, but Jerusalem is my home. Mm-hmm. And there's no place that feels like home.
Right.
And in a way, it's true. You can, all these other religions are beautiful, but when you're born and raised somewhere, and as a Jew, when you're born and raised as a Jew, or when converts are considered to be also born Jewish. They just reveal it later in their lives. But so when you're born as a Jew, you can go to all the most beautiful places in the world, but there's no place like home. And that's true. And that's, again, because of what Rabbi Steinsaltz says here, because it's a part of you. It's a part of your DNA, so to speak, of your identity. Yeah.
But I didn't know it until I traveled outside of it.
Right.
I had to travel outside of it to learn where home was.
That's right. That's right. I know. And I'll share with you something very personal. But if, this class, I think, should be emphasizing Rabbi Steinsaltz more than any other class. So let's go back to Rabbi Steinsaltz, and I could be speaking for hours. But so a year and a half ago, I felt that one of my children that was studying in Miami in high school, it was not the right place for him, and I didn't know what to do. And I wanted him to stay in the Jewish structure, but the options weren't too vast. So one of the options was to bring him home and have him go to the local high school year. And I asked Rabbi Steinsaltz, and that's the option he picked. And I was stunned because, after all, not Jewish at all, and he wouldn't have any Jewish friends. Anyway, I listened to Rabbi Steinsaltz. I mean, it's my guiding light. I brought him home, and after 2 months, he says, Rabbi, I want to go, Rabbi, Abba, I want to go to South Africa to study in a yeshiva. And I said, what happened? He says, I can't stand the place. Nothing Jewish about this place, and I'm deeply Jewish. I can't. So I asked Rabbi Steinsaltz again, should he go to South Africa? He says, yes, definitely. I said, then why didn't you tell me, you should have told me 2 months ago to send him to South Africa. Then, why have him come home and go to this Stone Jewish high school? And Rabbi Steinsaltz answered just that. He says, sometimes you have to go so far to appreciate what you have so close.
Right.
He went so far to appreciate what he had. Yeah.
I still believe that it's up to us to make us feel at home because, and you and I have had this conversation, there are a lot of temples that you walk into, you're new, and they do not welcome you, and you don't feel at home. So as Jews, we have to understand that and welcome other people of the family, or we will actually turn people away, which is why I was gone so long.
Right, I so agree. I mean, well said. It's saddening, to say the least.
And you spoke of, I'm sorry, you spoke of guilt in one of these conversations, and I mean, guilt is when you think about, you know, all the jokes about the guilt. I mean, the Jewish mother and everything. That's kind of what we're known for, and yet it's absolutely against Judaism.
Right.
You're supposed to make people feel good about themselves.
Right.
And a lot of people don't. So everything that we're learning here is kind of the reciprocal of what I've experienced in me trying to learn more about Judaism and not wanting to after a while.
No, very beautifully said. I was speaking about, I don't remember if it was the soul study this week or something like that, but back to Rabbi Steinsaltz to emphasize this idea. My father had the privilege of translating for him from English, I think he was speaking, or Hebrew even, to French in Luxembourg a few years ago. And after the lecture, my father's driving Rabbi Steinsaltz, and he hears Rabbi Steinsaltz emit an oi. And my father asked him, well, what happened? You just gave a lecture. I think it was very successful. What happened? Why this oi? And Rabbi Steinsaltz says, well, the hall was very dark. And when I spoke, I couldn't see the crowd. So I don't know if I connected to anyone. And in a way that epitomized who he was, a man that wanted to connect, that no matter who you were, he had this obsession to connect to you. To somehow infect you in the most positive way. And that's the antithesis of what you're saying, to be indifferent to our own family members especially, but even to those that are not, and to somehow not care and be apathetic to everyone and to anyone is really against what Judaism believes. It's against what Rabbi Steinsaltz has certainly embodied and taught. Yeah.
Rabbi, can I share? I think I shared this with you. I have a brother that you met. He was at your house. And in 1970, Rabbi Steinsaltz was in Chicago. My brother was very, very young. He was the head of the Zionist Youth Foundation. And he took Rabbi Steinsaltz around for 3 days. He was hosting him. And then I never knew this because I didn't know from Rabbi Steinsaltz. And then when I told Shimon that Rabbi Steinsaltz was coming, he says, oh my God, I know him. So when I saw Rabbi Steinsaltz at one of our functions, I told him, I said, by the way, do you know Shimon Waldfogel? And he says, how do you know him? I said, he's my brother. Oh my God, does he still live in the kibbutz? Did he go to, now my brother's a doctor. He says, is he still practicing medicine? I was like shocked. Yeah. So, and my brother's like totally secular, but still he was so connected.
Yeah, he had a phenomenal memory. No doubt.
I know.
He connected, when you connect to someone because you really love, then you don't forget that person. And that was Rabbi Steinsaltz. That's right.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes, Joyce.
I'm obviously been very quiet. I've been very quiet since Rabbi Steinsaltz died, and I wrote to you. But I think with everybody, what you're saying, I didn't get a chance to meet him personally, and I also have been drawn to the synagogue, not to the building of the synagogue, but when I first met you, you know, when you were speaking, and something, the warmth again of what we're talking about, Rabbi Steinsaltz is teaching about coming back to who we are. But I have felt a very strong vibration, and I don't understand it all. I just know it's very powerful. And my dreams have been different, and listening to everybody, you know, and how we are all very different, you know, we are different, but yet we're the same, joined in the soul of who we are as a family. And I think that's my quietness. It's very, it's deep, but it's not maudlin at all. It's not a bad thing at all. It's just very, very deep and very, very vibrational. Right. It's almost like I can feel that. And I can understand it from other beliefs in different ways, but I just feel like I had to read everything Rabbi Steinsaltz was, everything I have. Certainly don't have everything, and I certainly don't understand everything, not at all. But I had to have my hands on everything, and be in this class, and I could feel it.
Right. Look, it makes sense. I'll tell you what the Zohar again says. The foremost book of Kabbalah says that Sadiq which means that a righteous man that passes, he's found in this world much more than during his lifetime. There's no doubt that his presence is felt more now than maybe ever before. And the reason for that is because when a person passes, his soul is liberated. It's not encaged in the body anymore. Yeah. And the soul is unlimited. So it can be in multiple places at the same time. It can be much more present than it is when it is with the body and the restrictions of the body. And that's what a tzaddik does. A tzaddik, the person that's righteous, the part of his righteousness is because he was so attached and so connected to his generation. So that connection continues on even after he passes.
Thank you.
But I'll share just one more anecdote, and I want to conclude, you know, on this very note. In fact, was sharing with you just a short video about Rabbi Steinsaltz, words that he said. It's a 1 minute, maybe even less. Words that he said at a big event with Bill Clinton and others, who was the president of the time, 1994, after the passing of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was Rabbi Steinsaltz's Rebbe. So I want to conclude with that, but I'll share just one more anecdote. And that's the anecdote about, that I heard again this week, a bus driver, an Egged bus driver. Egged is the biggest bus company in Israel. An Egged bus driver shared this story. And he said that many, many years ago, Rabbi Steinsaltz came to speak to many Egged bus drivers. He was invited to speak, and a bus driver asked him a question about how to fix something in a bus. If the engine breaks down, how do you fix so-and-so? And Rabbi Steinsaltz answered the question. He knew exactly how to fix it. And then everyone bursted in laughter. And then a few years later, this bus driver bumped into Rabbi Steinsaltz in the street. He was driving his bus, and he immediately stopped the bus, reversed a little bit, opened the doors of the bus, and told Rabbi Steinsaltz, I want you to know you changed my life. And he became more observant ever since, etc. And he told the story of how during that lecture he was very touched by Rabbi Steinsaltz. And the reason everyone burst in laughter is because before the lecture, one of the bus drivers said, well, what's another rabbi going to come and speak to us about? They don't know anything anyway about what we do. And then another bus driver said, well, I'll bet you this rabbi knows. You can ask him any bus questions and he'll answer them. So when he eventually did ask that bus question, and Rabbi Steinsaltz did answer it, everyone laughed, not at Rabbi Steinsaltz, but rather at this bus driver who didn't believe that Rabbi Steinsaltz had that depth of knowledge and that ability to connect. But that ability to connect is really what changed this bus driver who's not telling the story, what changed his life. And in a way, I think that ability to connect remains. Rabbi Steinsaltz continues to connect with us, and as mentioned, the righteous are with us even more so after their passing than during their lives, as hard as it is to even fathom that. And therefore, if you'll allow me, I want to conclude just with sharing my screen. Gila, if that's okay.
Absolutely,
And
yes.
let's watch just a very short film, not even 1 minute, of Rabbi Steinsaltz and what he said. There we go, what he said, just words that he said at an event shortly after the passing of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. 39 seconds. So.
Woe is to the world that lost its leader. Woe is to the ship that lost its captain. When the Sadiq passes away, he's found far more all over than he was in this world. Even though the captain is no longer here, we can do it. We should do it. We shall do it. Just pass a little bit more of land, and then we'll come to the real heaven. We'll meet again the captain.
All right, we can do it. We should do it. We shall do it. And then we'll meet the captain again.
Rabbi, may I ask a question that relates to our class and our reading of the book?
Yes.
Of Rabbi Steinsaltz's books.
Yes.
So when we started the class, we said, that was before Rabbi Steinsaltz's stroke and he could still speak. Then there came a time when he had his stroke. And then after he had his stroke, he could no longer speak.
Right.
And as a result of that, we said, why don't we speak and read out loud, take turns and read these words that Rabbi Steinsaltz can no longer say himself in order to, hopefully bring back his speech.
Right.
So now he is no longer with us. When we read the words now, what can you tell us about the importance and the feeling and just the essence of the objective of the reading now?
Okay, that's a great question. I'll give you the image of the Talmud, and that's what I'll share with you. Very mystical image, and it says that when a person speaks the words of the righteous after their passing, then siftotav medovevot bakevet. That then the words of the righteous, when we speak the words of the righteous speak with us. Their lips are moving in the grave, speaking with us. And that poel yeshuot bekerev haaretz. That's what the Talmud says. That creates tremendous miracles or redemption, salvation in this land. And so just by studying the words of the Talmud like we're doing and saying Rabbi Steinsaltz's words, it makes his words also, his lips also move in the grave, so to speak. And he's harmonizing his lips with our lips. And that creates tremendous miracles and brings redemption and salvation upon the land.